Every morning, long before the city fully wakes up, before the first barista steams milk or the first commuter curses a delayed train, a man in a faded blue uniform pushes open the heavy glass doors of Viridian Dynamics. The building stands tall in the heart of downtown, sleek, modern, all steel and glass, the kind of place that screams success. Inside, it's quiet at this hour. The only sounds are the hum of servers in the basement, the soft click of security cameras panning, and the steady swish of a mop across polished marble. He's been doing this job for 12 years. Same route, same schedule, same quiet dignity. Most people who work here don't even know his name. To them, he's just the janitor, a background figure like the potted plants in the lobby or the elevator music no one really listens to. They pass him in the hallways without making eye contact, sometimes stepping around his bucket like it's an obstacle, not thinking twice about the person holding the mop. But if they did stop, if they really looked, they'd see someone with calm eyes, a slight smile that never quite reaches his lips and hands that move with quiet purpose. They'd notice how he always wipes the smudges off the glass doors before leaving for the night, how he arranges the lobby chairs just so in the morning, how he never complains, even when someone leaves coffee cups or crumpled papers on the floor after midnight. Meetings, what they don't know, what no one knows is that this man speaks 9 languages. It didn't start as a party trick or a resume booster. It started with lullabies. His mother, a university professor who studied ancient dialects, used to sing him to sleep in French one night, Portuguese the next. His father, a quiet man who worked for the Foreign Service, brought home postcards from embassies in Cairo, Beijing, Moscow, each with a short note written in the local script. By the time he was 10, he could switch between languages like flipping channels on a TV. At school, while other kids struggled with basic Spanish, he was reading Russian poetry for fun and chatting with tourists in flawless Italian during summer trips to the coast. Back then, life felt wide open. He dreamed of becoming a translator for the United Nations, or maybe a cultural ambassador, someone who could help people understand each other across borders. He won a partial scholarship to a top university, studied linguistics, and even interned at a small international NGO. But then, everything changed. His father passed away suddenly, heart attack, no warning. Medical bills piled up, his younger sister needed surgery, and insurance only covered part of it. The scholarship wasn't enough. He dropped out of school, took the first job he could find, and never looked back. Not because he didn't care, but because someone had to keep the lights on at home. The janitorial job paid just enough. It came with health benefits, which mattered more than pride. He told himself it was temporary, but years passed. His sister graduated, got a good job, moved out. Still, he stayed. By then, it wasn't just about money. It was about routine, about not having to explain himself, about the strange peace that came from being invisible. In a world that often judged people by their titles, his lack of one became a kind of armor. He never talked about his past at work, never corrected anyone who mispronounced his name, never mentioned that he could read the fine print on international shipping labels in the supply closet, or that he understood every word of the heated Mandarin phone call the marketing director thought no one overheard. He kept it all tucked away like old letters in a drawer. Most days it didn't bother him. He found joy in small things. The way sunlight hit the lobby at 6:15 a.m., the rare good morning from a night shift security guard, the satisfaction of a perfectly clean floor. He liked the rhythm of his work. There was honesty in it. No politics, no presentations, no pretending. But sometimes, late at night, when the building was empty and the city lights glittered outside the 30th floor windows he was wiping down, he'd pause. He'd hear a snippet of a foreign news channel playing on someone's forgotten laptop, or catch a phrase in Arabic from a late-night call in the conference room. And for a second, he'd feel that old spark, the one that used to light him up when he was translating poetry or helping a lost traveler find their hotel. He'd shake it off, smile to himself, keep mopping. No one expected anything from him, and in a strange way that was a relief. Until one Tuesday morning, it started like any other. He was restocking paper towels in the executive wing when voices from the main conference room caught his attention. Raised voices, frustration. He recognized the CEO's tone, calm but strained. Through the slightly ajar door, he saw a large screen split into 4 video feeds. A man in a crisp white thobe in Riyadh, A woman in a silk blouse in Shanghai, another in a sharp suit in Berlin, and the CEO at the head of the table, looking more tired than usual. They were finalizing a major deal, something about AI partnerships across 3 continents. But the translation software had glitched. The Arabic feed was cutting out, the Mandarin subtitles were delayed, and the German participant kept interrupting, thinking he wasn't being heard. Tempers were rising. Hand gestures grew sharper. The CEO ran a hand through his hair, clearly out of his depth. Then the man from Riyadh said something sharp and fast in Arabic, something about honor and deadlines. The CEO blinked, waiting for the translation that never came. The room tensed. Without thinking, the janitor stepped forward just enough to be seen in the doorway. In smooth, calm Arabic, he said, "He's saying that if the terms aren't finalized by noon his time, his board will walk away and they won't return." Silence. All eyes turned to him. He froze, realized what he'd done. His face warmed. "Sorry," he mumbled in English, backing away. "I didn't mean to. I'll just finish the bathrooms," but it was too late. The CEO stared at him, not with annoyance, but with something closer to wonder. The woman in Shanghai leaned forward on the screen, eyes wide. "You speak Mandarin too?" she asked in perfect Chinese. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and German?" the man in Berlin asked, switching languages. "A little," he replied, in flawless German. The room didn't erupt in cheers. No one clapped. But something shifted. The air changed. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't just the janitor. He was seen. He didn't know it yet. But that moment, the accidental, unplanned, utterly human moment, was about to change everything. Not just for him, but for the whole office. But for now, he just stood there, mop in hand, heart pounding, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or the best one. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. The janitor stood frozen in the doorway, mop handle gripped tight in his hands, knuckles white. He hadn't meant to speak. It had just slipped out, like catching a falling glass before you even think about it. But now every eye in the room was on him, and the silence felt heavier than any bucket of water he'd ever carried. The CEO was the first to move. He didn't look angry or confused. He looked curious, like someone who just spotted a hidden door in a house they'd lived in for years. "You understood all of that?" he asked, voice low, almost gentle. The janitor nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, and you speak." "All of them?" the woman on the screen from Shanghai asked again, this time in Mandarin. He took a breath. "I do." The man in Berlin switched to Russian, testing him. Without missing a beat, the janitor answered in the same language. "Polite but firm. I'd prefer we stick to the languages needed for this meeting. If that's all right." A ripple went through the video calls. The tension that had been building for the last 20 minutes. The frustration, the miscommunication, the fear that a multi-million-dollar deal was slipping away, began to ease. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Could you help us finish this? Just translate what they're saying real time?" The janitor hesitated. This wasn't his place. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. But then he looked at the faces on the screen. People who were just trying to do their jobs, same as him, and he nodded. "All right." For the next 40 minutes, he stood near the door, not at the table, not sitting, just listening and translating. When the Riyadh representative spoke sharply about contract clauses, he rendered it not just accurately, but with the right tone, respectful, firm, but not confrontational. When the Shanghai executive mentioned a cultural concern about launch timing during a local holiday, he didn't just say the words. He added context. "She's worried it might seem disrespectful if we go live during Qingming Festival. It's a time for honoring ancestors." The CEO watched him closely. Not just his words, but his posture, his calm, the way he never interrupted, never showed off. This wasn't performance. It was second nature. By the end of the call, the deal was back on track. Handshakes were exchanged over video. Smiles returned. As the screens went dark, the CEO turned to the janitor. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded like he really meant it. The janitor gave a small nod. "You're welcome." Then without another word, he picked up his bucket and walked out, heart still racing. Back in the supply closet, he leaned against the shelves, breathing deeply. He replayed the scene in his head. Had he overstepped? Would they think he was showing off? Would someone report him for eavesdropping? He'd been taught long ago that people like him, quiet, working class, invisible, weren't supposed to step into rooms like that. You stayed in your lane. You kept your head down, but part of him, a small but stubborn part, felt something else too. Relief. Like a window had cracked open after years of being sealed shut. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He cleaned the same floors, emptied the same bins, but everything felt different. People looked at him now. Not all of them. Most were still lost in their own worlds, but a few did double takes. The receptionist paused mid-sip of her coffee when he walked by. An intern who usually ignored everyone muttered a quiet hey as he passed the break room. He didn't know it, but word had already spread. By lunchtime, half the office had heard. The janitor spoke 9 languages. Some were skeptical. "No way," said a sales manager, laughing. Probably just picked up a few phrases. But others remembered little things. The time he'd calmly helped a lost French client find the right floor, or how he always greeted the Korean cleaning crew in their own language. That afternoon, the CEO walked into the basement hallway where the janitor was wiping down the vending machines. He didn't come with a crowd or a camera, just him in a wrinkled shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than executive. "Got a minute?" he asked. The janitor turned off the rag. "Sure." They stood near the humming soda machine, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. No fancy office, no power dynamic, just 2 men in a quiet corner of a big building. "I've been thinking about this morning," the CEO said. "About you. I looked up your file. 12 years here. Never late, never a complaint, and not a single mention of, well, any of this." He gestured vaguely, as if language itself were visible in the air. The janitor shrugged. "Didn't seem relevant." "Relevant?" The CEO almost laughed. "You just saved a deal that's been in the works for 18 months. You understood nuances our paid translators missed. And you've been mopping floors this whole time?" "I needed the job," the janitor said simply. "Still do." The CEO was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" The question hung there. The janitor looked down at his worn shoes. "When you're in a uniform like this," he said slowly, "people don't expect much. And after a while, you stop expecting them to see you differently. Besides," he added with a faint smile, "nobody ever asked." The CEO nodded like he understood more than the words. "What's your story?" he asked gently. So the janitor told him. Just the basics. The parents, the languages at home, the scholarship, the family emergency, the choice he made. He didn't make it dramatic. No self-pity, no grand speeches. Just facts, spoken softly, like he was sharing a secret he'd carried too long. When he finished, the CEO didn't offer empty praise. He didn't say "you're wasted here" or "you deserve better." Instead, he asked, "Would you be open to talking more? Maybe over coffee? Not as CEO and janitor, just as people?" The janitor studied his face. Saw no pity, no agenda, just genuine interest. After a long pause, he nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." They met the next morning before sunrise in a small diner 2 blocks from the office. No suits, no titles. Just coffee, scrambled eggs, and real conversation. The CEO learned about dialects in Buenos Aires, about how Portuguese sounds like music to someone who grew up with Spanish, about the way certain Arabic proverbs can't be translated. They have to be felt. And the janitor learned that the CEO had once wanted to be a teacher, not a businessman. That he hated board meetings. That he sometimes felt like an imposter in his own company. By the time they walked back to the building, the sun was up. The city was awake, and something had shifted, not just between them, but in the air around them. Later that day, the CEO called a short meeting with HR and his leadership team. He didn't announce anything big. Just said, "We have someone in this building with a rare and valuable skill set. I think it's time we stopped overlooking what's right in front of us." No one argued. Not really, because deep down they all remembered the look on his face that morning. Calm, capable, completely in his element. It wasn't about charity. It was about fairness, about finally seeing someone for who they truly were. But the janitor didn't know any of that yet. That evening, as he locked up the supply closet for the night, he glanced up at the glass-walled executive floor. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He felt possible, and that more than anything scared and thrilled him all at once. The next morning, the janitor walked into the building like any other day. Same worn boots, same quiet steps. but something felt off. The security guard gave him a longer look than usual. The elevator doors opened to a hushed silence on the executive floor, where people suddenly stopped talking when he passed. He caught snippets, but heard he speaks Russian. I saved the whole deal. Xiao took him to breakfast. He kept his eyes down, focused on his cart, but his stomach twisted. He didn't like being the center of attention. All his life, he'd stayed out of the spotlight. Not because he was shy, but because he'd learned the hard way that people often punished you for standing out when you weren't supposed to. By mid-morning, a message appeared on the break room bulletin board. Please report to conference room B at 10 a.m. No name, but he knew it was for him. He knocked softly, then stepped inside. The CEO was there, along with two others, one from Human Resources, the other from Global Operations. They stood when he entered, not out of formality but respect. That surprised him more than anything. Thanks for coming, the CEO said, gesturing to a chair. We've been talking, and we think it's time your role here reflected what you actually bring to this company. The janitor sat slowly, hands resting on his knees. I'm not looking to leave custodial, he said carefully. I like the work. It's honest. No one's asking you to leave, the HR rep said gently. But we're offering something new. A position we're creating just for you, Global Liaison Consultant. You'd work directly with international teams, help with translations, cultural context, client communications. You'd sit in on key meetings, review contracts for tone and nuance, even train staff on cross-cultural communication. He blinked. Consultant? Yes, the CEO said. Full salary, well above your current pay, benefits, office space, the whole package. You'd still be part of Viridian, just in a role that actually uses your gifts. The janitor was quiet for a long time. This wasn't charity, he could tell. They'd thought it through, but old fears crept in. What if he failed? What if people said he didn't belong? What if this was just a temporary experiment that ended with him back in the basement, now seen as a disappointment? I'd need to think about it, he said finally. Of course, the CEO replied. Take the weekend. But I'll tell you this. This company has missed out on 12 years of your talent. I don't want to waste another day. That night, he didn't sleep much. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the offer letter they'd printed for him. The number stunned him. It was more money than he'd ever made. Enough to finally fix the leaky roof. Enough to help his sister start her own business like she'd been dreaming of. But it wasn't just about money. It was about identity. For over a decade, he'd defined himself by what he did with his hands. Cleaning, fixing, maintaining. Now they were asking him to lead with his mind, his voice, his knowledge. That felt exposed. Sunday evening, he called his sister. She answered on the first ring. You heard? He asked. I heard, she said, voice thick with emotion. I cried, you know. Not because of the money. Because someone finally saw you. He swallowed hard. What if I'm not good at it? You've been good at it your whole life, she said firmly. You just never got paid for it. The next morning, he walked into the CEO's office before his shift even started. He didn't bring the letter. He didn't need it. I'll do it, he said. The CEO didn't smile right away. He just nodded like he'd been holding his breath. Good. The transition wasn't instant. They gave him a week to wrap up his custodial duties, train his replacement, and slowly shift into the new role. On his last day mopping floors, a few coworkers stopped by. One handed him a coffee. Another said, We're going to miss seeing you down here. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. He realized, with a lump in his throat, that some of them had seen him all along. They just didn't know how to say it. His new office was small but bright, near the international team's wing. On his first official day, he wore a button-down shirt he'd bought secondhand, slightly too big but clean. He arranged his desk with a notebook, a pen, and a small photo of his parents. His mother smiling in front of a bookshelf, his father in a suit, standing proudly at an embassy gate. His first assignment was reviewing a draft email to a potential partner in Tokyo. The original version was technically correct, but stiff, almost cold. He rewrote it with softer phrasing, added a line about seasonal greetings mentioning the cherry blossoms which were just blooming, and suggested sending it in the morning their time, not late at night. The client responded within hours, thanking them for the thoughtful and respectful message. Word spread fast, not just in the office but outside. A week later, a reporter from a business magazine called, asking for a comment about the janitor who became a global strategist. The CEO politely declined interviews, for now. "This isn't a gimmick," he told the team. "It's a correction, but not everyone was happy." In the break room, he overheard two managers talking. "Feels like a PR stunt," one muttered. "Next thing you know, they'll promote the mailroom guy to CFO." He pretended not to hear. But it stung. Still, he kept showing up. Kept listening. Kept translating not just words, but intentions, emotions, unspoken worries. When a Brazilian client seemed hesitant during a call, he noticed the slight pause before yes, and gently asked if there was a concern about local regulations. Turned out there was, and they fixed it before the contract was signed. Slowly, the doubters quieted. Even the ones who rolled their eyes at first started stopping by his office with questions. "How do you say we value your partnership in Korean without sounding robotic? Or is this phrase offensive in Egyptian Arabic?" He never made them feel small for asking. He remembered what it was like to be on the other side, to be the one no one thought had anything to offer. One afternoon, the CEO dropped by with 2 cups of coffee. "How's it going?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Better than I expected," the janitor, no, the consultant, admitted. "Still feels strange, though. Like I borrowed someone else's life." The CEO smiled. "You didn't borrow it. You earned it. Twice over." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching rain slide down the windows. Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, for the first time in a long time, a man felt like he belonged exactly where he was. Not because of a title, but because he was finally allowed to be himself. And that, more than any promotion or paycheck, was the real victory. The first few weeks in his new role felt like walking on ice, careful, quiet, waiting for it to crack beneath him. People watched him, some with curiosity, some with doubt, a few with quiet admiration. He kept his head down, did the work, and tried not to let the whispers get to him. But it was hard. After years of being invisible, suddenly everyone had an opinion about him. In the break room, conversations would stop when he walked in. Emails about cultural sensitivity now came with his name attached, and he could feel the weight of expectation every time he hit send. One morning, he overheard someone say, "They're acting like he's some kind of genius just because he speaks a few languages." It stung, not because it was harsh, but because it missed the point entirely. It wasn't about showing off. It was about understanding, something this fast-moving, high-pressure office had long forgotten how to do. Then came the Tokyo contract. A major deal with a Japanese tech firm was nearing final approval. Everything looked good on paper, terms, timelines, pricing, but something felt off to him. He read the draft agreement again, then listened to the recording of the last call. The Japanese team had said yes multiple times, but their tone was polite, too polite. In his experience, that often meant hesitation, not agreement. He asked to join the next call. At first, there was resistance. "We've got legal and sales handling this," someone said. But the CEO backed him. Let him listen. During the meeting, the Japanese lead kept using phrases like "we will consider" and "this is worth further discussion." To most in the room, it sounded like progress. To him, it sounded like a soft no. After the call, he pulled the sales director aside. "They're not comfortable with the exclusivity clause," he explained. "In their culture, locking into one partner too early can seem aggressive. They want flexibility, not control." The director frowned. "But the clause is standard." "Standard for us," he said gently. "Not for them." Reluctantly, the team agreed to revise the language, removing the rigid terms, adding room for collaboration. 2 days later, the Japanese side signed without hesitation. The deal went through smoother than anyone expected. That was the turning point. Suddenly, people weren't just tolerating him, they were seeking him out. The marketing team asked him to review a campaign for the Middle East. The product team wanted his input on user interface wording for Latin American markets. Even the legal department started sending him drafts before finalizing international contracts. He never acted like he had all the answers. He'd say things like, "in my experience," or "this might not apply, but in Argentina we'd interpret this differently." He made it clear he wasn't replacing experts, just adding another layer of care. One afternoon, the receptionist stopped by his office. She held a small notebook. "I'm trying to learn Portuguese," she said shyly. "My grandmother's from Brazil, but she passed before I could really talk to her in her language. Would you?" Maybe help me with a few words? He smiled. Of course. That became a quiet ritual. 10 minutes every Friday over tea, practicing greetings, family words, little phrases. Soon others joined. An intern wanted to sound natural in French for a client call. A project manager needed help writing a respectful email in Mandarin. What started as curiosity turned into connection. Even the skeptics began to soften. The same manager who'd called it a PR stunt came to him after a failed call with a German partner. I don't get it, he admitted, frustrated. We offered everything they asked for, but they seemed annoyed. He listened to the recording. You kept interrupting, he said kindly. In Germany, directness is valued, but so is letting people finish their thoughts. They took it as disrespectful. The manager nodded slowly. I had no idea. Now you do, he replied. That's all any of us can do, learn as we go. The office started to feel different, not just in how they worked, but in how they treated each other. People paused before sending an email to an overseas team. They asked, how would this sound to someone in Seoul or São Paulo? Meetings became less about pushing agendas and more about listening, the CEO noticed. At a leadership meeting, he said, we didn't just gain a translator, we gained a teacher. But the real test came during a high-stakes negotiation with a Brazilian distributor. Tensions were high. Deadlines were tight. The U.S. team wanted fast decisions. The Brazilian side kept delaying, citing family obligations and local holidays. Frustration built. One executive muttered, they're just making excuses. He stepped in, not with authority but with empathy. In Brazil, he explained, business is personal. If someone says their cousin is getting married or their mother is sick, it's not an excuse, it's a priority. Pushing harder right now will damage trust, not speed things up. He suggested a simple change. Reschedule the final meeting for after the holiday week, and send a handwritten note, translated into Portuguese, wishing them well during the celebration. The team agreed reluctantly. A week later, the Brazilian partner called, not just to confirm the meeting, but to thank them. You treated us like people, not just a contract, they said. The deal closed with a handshake and a promise of long-term partnership. Back at the office, the mood was lighter. Even the coffee machine seemed to hum with a different energy. One day, the receptionist brought him a small potted plant for his desk. It's a peace lily, she said. They say it helps you feel calm. You've helped all of us feel a little more human. He placed it by the window next to his parents' photo. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. He still sometimes caught himself looking down when he walked through the lobby. Old habits dying hard. But now people greeted him by name. Not hey janitor or you, but by his real name, spoken with respect. And when he passed the custodial closet, the one he used to spend hours in, he'd nod to the new janitor, a quiet man with kind eyes. Sometimes they'd share a few words in Spanish. No one else understood, but it didn't matter. It was a reminder, talent isn't always where you expect it. And dignity doesn't come from a title. It comes from how you treat people no matter what uniform you wear. The office hadn't just accepted him. It had changed because of him. Not with fanfare or headlines, but in 1,000 small ways. More patience, more curiosity, more care. And that, he realized, was worth more than any promotion. 6 months had passed since the day he stepped into that conference room and changed everything, mostly by just speaking the truth in a language someone else could understand. Now his office wasn't just a room with a desk and a peace lily. It was a place people came to when they wanted to get things right, not just fast. He still couldn't believe it sometimes. But he'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. This wasn't luck. It was long overdue recognition. The company had changed too, not in a flashy overnight way, but in the quiet rhythm of daily work. Meetings started with a moment of pause before jumping into agendas. Emails to international teams were reviewed not just for grammar, but for tone. Someone had even started a culture corner on the internal newsletter, sharing simple tips like how to greet a client in Seoul, or why you shouldn't hand someone a business card with one hand in Tokyo. Most of it came from him, but he always made sure to credit others, to keep it a team effort, not a one-man show. Then came the announcement no one saw coming. At the monthly all-hands meeting, the CEO stood at the front of the room, not behind a podium, just standing like a regular person. We've been thinking a lot about talent, he said. Not just the kind that shows up on resumes, but the kind that's been right here all along, quietly making this place better. He paused, looked around. So we're launching something new, the Hidden Talents Initiative. Starting next week, anyone can share a skill they have that's outside their job description. Maybe you're a musician, a coder, a baker, a fluent speaker of Swahili. Doesn't matter. We'll find ways to use it, support it, celebrate it. The room buzzed. People turned to each other, eyes wide. For years, the unspoken rule had been stick to your lane. Now the company was saying, bring your whole self. He sat in the back, heart full. This wasn't about him, not really. It was about opening the door for the next person who'd been hiding their light, afraid it wouldn't be welcome. The initiative took off faster than anyone expected. The IT specialist who played jazz piano started hosting lunchtime concerts in the lobby. The finance analyst who grew up on a farm taught a workshop on sustainable gardening on the rooftop. And the new janitor, the quiet man with kind eyes, revealed he was a master woodcarver. Soon, his small sculptures sat on shelves throughout the office, each one labeled with a note. Made with care by Raphael, custodial team. No one was promoted just for having a hobby. But everyone felt seen. Then came the gala. It was the company's annual celebration, usually a stiff affair with fancy food and awkward speeches. But this year felt different. People laughed more, talked longer, danced even, and when the CEO took the stage near the end of the night, the room quieted, not out of obligation but anticipation. He held up a small, simple award, a glass plaque with a single word etched in the center. Vision. This award, he said, usually goes to someone who dreamed up a new product or closed a huge deal. But this year, it goes to someone who reminded us what we'd forgotten, that every person has value even if it doesn't fit in a job title. He turned and looked straight at him. We didn't promote you because you speak 9 languages. We promoted you because you taught us how to listen. The room erupted, not in polite applause, but in real, warm, standing ovation. People clapped with tears in their eyes. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. He stood slowly, face warm, and walked to the front. He didn't give a long speech, just said, thank you, but this isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who's ever been told they're just something. Just a cleaner, just an intern, just support staff. You're never just anything. You're whole. Afterward, people lined up to shake his hand, not out of formality, but gratitude. The receptionist hugged him. The skeptical manager from months ago said, I was wrong, and I'm glad. Even the security guard who'd watched him come and go for 12 years gave a quiet nod and said, knew you were special all along. But the real surprise came the next week. He got a call from the local community college. A professor had heard his story, through a student whose cousin worked at Veridian, and asked if he'd considered teaching a short course on practical multilingual communication. Just 4 sessions. No pressure. He said yes. And that's how, every Thursday evening, he found himself in a classroom full of eager faces, nurses, delivery drivers, retirees, high school grads, people who wanted to connect across cultures not for profit but for understanding. He didn't lecture. He shared stories, taught them how to say I'm here to help in 5 languages, how to apologize when you've misunderstood, how to listen with your whole self. One student, a young woman working 2 jobs to support her family, stayed after class one night. You give me hope, she said. That maybe my skills matter even if I don't have a fancy degree. He looked at her and saw himself years ago. They do, he said. Always have. Around the same time, he quietly set up a scholarship fund in his mother's name. Not a big one. Just enough to help one student a year study linguistics or cross-cultural studies, especially if they came from a background like his. No fanfare. No press release. Just a small act of love passed forward. Back at the office, things kept evolving. The Hidden Talents board in the lobby was always full. Notes, photos, little demos. People smiled more in the hallways. There was a softness now. A sense that this place wasn't just about output, but about people. He still sometimes walked the floors late at night, not with a mop, but with a notebook thinking through a tricky translation or a new workshop idea. And when he passed the custodial closet, he'd nod to Raphael, who'd smile back and say, Buenas noches, in that warm, familiar way. He wasn't the janitor anymore, but he never forgot what it felt like to be unseen, and that was the secret, really. Not the languages, not the promotion, but the remembering, because real change doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from one person choosing to see another, from a CEO who listened, from a man who finally let himself be heard, from an office that learned slowly that dignity isn't earned, it's given, simply because someone is human. Years later, when new employees asked how Viridian became known not just for innovation, but for kindness, someone would always tell the story. It started with a mop, a meeting, and a man who spoke 9 languages but listened in all of them. And in that story, everyone found a little piece of themselves.